Episode 1. The Mask Falls. The war was over. Smoke still curled from the edges of the battlefield, and the banners of Ares lay trampled in the mud. Soldiers whispered as they passed the prisoner, tall, cloaked, face hidden behind a silver mask etched with serpent runes. Vale didn't speak. He walked with quiet dignity, chains clinking softly at his wrists. The mask had never left his face, not in battle, not in surrender. It was more than armor. It was identity. They led him through the marble halls of Solver's palace, past golden statues and velvet drapes. Everything here gleamed. Everything here reeked of victory. At the throne, King Renard waited. Young, sharp-eyed, dressed in black and crimson. His crown tilted slightly, as if he wore it out of obligation, not pride. So Renard said, voice echoing through the chamber. The Silver Phantom. The Veiled Prince of Ares. Vale didn't respond. Renard stood. Remove the mask. Vale's fingers twitched. Is that a royal command? Renard stepped down from the dais, stopping just inches away. It is. Vale reached up slowly, the chains tugging against his wrists. The mask came off with a soft click. Silence. Renard stared. Vale's face was pale, angular, eyes like stormlight, striking, unreadable. His lips were pressed into a line, but his gaze didn't waver. Renard's breath caught. You're beautiful, he said, almost to himself. Vale blinked. Is that relevant? Renard turned to his advisors. I've made my decision. He'll be my consort. Gasps rippled through the court. Vale's voice was calm. You want to marry your enemy? Renard's eyes didn't leave his. I want to marry the only person who didn't flinch when I looked him in the eye. Vale's heart thudded once, sharply. For my people, he said quietly. I accept. Renard nodded. Then prepare the ceremony. Tomorrow we bind. As Vale was led away, mask in hand, he glanced back once. Renard was still watching him. And in that gaze, Vale saw something dangerous. Not hatred. Not conquest. But the beginning of something far more complicated. Episode 2. The Crown Cracks. The palace buzzed with anticipation. Servants polished silver goblets, florists lined the halls with crimson lilies, and nobles rehearsed their smiles. Tomorrow, the king would wed his consort, the veiled prince turned captive, turned partner. Vale stood alone in the royal vault, summoned by Renard himself. The king had wanted to show him something, an ancient relic unearthed during the war. A symbol, he'd said, of new beginnings. It's called the Ember Crown, Renard had explained. Said to burn away falsehoods and reveal truth. Vale had nodded, unsure whether to be moved or wary. Now, the relic sat on a pedestal, pulsing faintly with red light. Renard reached for it. Careful, Vale said. It's humming. Renard smiled. It's harmless. Just old magic. He touched it. The vault exploded in light. Vale was thrown backward, crashing into a pillar. Dust and heat filled the air. Guards rushed in, shouting. The relic lay shattered, its glow extinguished. Renard lay unconscious, crown askew, blood trickling from his temple. Hours later, Vale sat beside Renard's bed, fingers clenched around the edge of the mattress. The royal healer emerged from the shadows, face grim. He's alive, she said. But the relic, it burned through his memory. Vale stood. How much did it take? The healer hesitated. He remembers the war. The battlefield. But nothing after. Vale's breath caught. Not the wedding. Not me. The healer nodded. To him, you're still the enemy. The next morning, Renard stormed into the throne room, robes disheveled, eyes wild. Why is the Silver Phantom in my palace? He roared. I'd rather be blind than make a man my consort. Gasps echoed through the court. Vale stood silently, mask gone, face bare. Renard turned, furious, then froze. His eyes locked onto Vale's face. His expression shifted. Confusion. Something softer. He stepped forward slowly. You. What's your name? Vale blinked. Vale. Renard reached out, taking his hand. Vale, he repeated. I'll make you my consort. An advisor stammered, Sire, he's a man. And yesterday you said. Renard waved him off. That was then. I've changed my mind, all right? Vale stared at him. And for the second time, he was chosen. Not for war. Not for duty. But for something far more fragile. And far more dangerous. Episode 3. The Stranger in Silk. The palace had never felt so unfamiliar. Vale walked through the grand corridors in ceremonial robes of silver and black, his mask tucked away in a velvet box. Servants bowed as he passed, but their eyes lingered, curious, cautious, confused. He was the king's consort now. But the king didn't remember. Renard sat on the throne like it burned him. His posture was regal, but his gaze flickered with uncertainty every time it landed on Vale. He hadn't asked about the wedding. He hadn't asked about the bond. Only Vale's name and the face that haunted his dreams. "You're different," Renard had said the night before. "Not like the man I fought." Vale had smiled faintly. "I wasn't wearing silk then." Now, in court, Vale stood beside the throne, silent as the nobles debated trade routes and border tensions. He was meant to be ornamental. Present, but quiet. Lady Ligia, the king's advisor, leaned toward Renard. "Your Majesty, the consort should not attend council. It's unconventional." Renard glanced at Vale, then shrugged. "He's here. Let him listen." Vale didn't flinch. But he felt the weight of every stare. After court, he wandered into the royal gardens, his only refuge. The moonflowers had begun to bloom again, pale and trembling in the breeze. Renard found him there. "You don't speak much," he said. Vale turned. "I used to." Renard frowned. "To me?" Vale nodded. "You used to ask about my dreams. My fears. My brother." Renard's voice was quiet. "I don't remember." Vale's gaze softened. "I know." Renard stepped closer. "But I want to." Vale hesitated. "Why?" Renard's eyes searched his. "Because when I look at you, I feel something I can't name. Like I'm missing a piece of myself." Vale's breath caught. "Then let me be your memory," he said. "Until yours returns." Renard reached out, brushing a strand of hair from Vale's face. "Then stay close. I don't want to forget you again." The moonflowers swayed behind them. And in the quiet between words, Vale began to reclaim his place, not as a prisoner, not as a stranger, but as someone worth remembering. Episode 4. The Thorn in the Court. The court was colder now. Not in temperature, but in tone. Whispers followed Vale like shadows. Nobles bowed, but their eyes lingered too long. The consort bond had been declared, but the king's memory was fractured, and Vale's presence felt like a riddle no one could solve. At the center of the unease stood Lord Thorn, a noble of old blood and sharper ambition. He had once been considered a candidate for the king's hand. Now he watched Vale with the precision of a hunter. "You've risen quickly," Thorn said one morning, voice smooth as silk. "From prisoner to consort. Quite the ascent." Vale didn't flinch. "I didn't climb. I was chosen." Thorn smiled. "By a king who doesn't remember choosing you." Vale turned away. "Memory doesn't erase truth." Thorn's eyes narrowed. "Let's test that." That evening, Vale was summoned to a private gathering in the East Wing, an informal court salon hosted by Thorn himself. Renard was absent, attending to diplomatic letters. Vale arrived alone. The room was filled with nobles, wine, and veiled barbs. Thorn stood at the center, holding a scroll. "A game," he announced. "Each guest will answer a question. Truthfully. No masks. No titles." Vale's jaw tightened. Thorn's gaze locked onto him. "Consort Vale, you first." He unrolled the scroll. "What was your role in the war?" Vale's voice was calm. "Strategist. Commander. Masked to protect my people." Thorn smiled. "And how many lives did your strategies cost?" The room fell silent. Vale's fingers curled around his goblet. "War costs lives. I regret everyone." Thorn stepped closer. "Do you regret the king's?" Vale blinked. "He's alive." Thorn's voice dropped. "But his memory is dead. And you stand beside him like a ghost he can't name." Vale's breath caught. Thorn turned to the room. "Is this the man we trust to guide our king?" The nobles murmured. Vale stepped forward. "I don't guide him. I stand beside him. And I will, whether you approve or not." Thorn's smile faltered. Just then, the doors opened. Renard entered. He looked around, confused. What is this? Thorn bowed. A test of truth, Your Majesty. Renard's eyes found Vale. Did you pass? Vale met his gaze. I didn't lie. Renard walked to him, took his hand, and turned to the room. Then that's all I need. Thorn's face darkened. But Vale stood taller. The trap had failed. And the court had seen something else. Not a prisoner. Not a pawn. But a consort who would not be unmasked again. Episode 5. The Brother Beneath the Flame. The royal archives smelled of dust and secrets. Vale moved between shelves of ancient scrolls and forgotten relics, fingers trailing across bindings etched with runes. He had come here alone, long after midnight, guided by a whisper in the healer's report. The relic that shattered the king's memory, she'd said, was once sealed by royal blood. But someone broke that seal. Vale had asked who. She'd hesitated. Only one other shares Renard's blood. His brother, Prince Elian. Vale froze. Elian died in the fire. The healer's voice was quiet. That's what the court was told. Now, Vale stood before a locked cabinet marked with the sigil of House Solvar, a sun split by shadow. He pressed his palm to the seal. It glowed faintly, then clicked open. Inside lay a journal. Leather-bound. Singed at the edges. He opened it. To Renard, if you're reading this, I've failed. The Ember Crown is unstable. I tried to contain it, but the court wouldn't listen. I fear it will burn through memory, through truth. If I disappear, know this, I did it for you. Vale's breath caught. Elian hadn't died. He'd vanished. And the relic, the one Renard touched, had been his last attempt to protect the throne. Vale closed the journal, heart pounding. He's alive, he whispered. Somewhere. The next morning, Vale stood before Renard in the garden. Your brother, he said. Elian. Do you remember him? Renard frowned. Only fragments. A voice. A laugh. Then, fire. Vale handed him the journal. Renard read in silence, eyes darkening. He tried to save me, he said. And now he's gone. Vale stepped closer. But not lost. I'll find him. Renard looked up. Why? Vale's voice was steady. Because you deserve your memories. And because I want to know the man who made you who you are. Renard reached out, fingers brushing Vale's. Then we searched together. That night, Vale packed quietly. Maps. Runes. A dagger carved from serpent bone. Renard watched from the doorway. You're not just my consort, he said. You're my compass. Vale smiled faintly. Then let's find the flame that went missing. Outside, the stars burned brighter. Inside, a new journey began. Not for war. Not for power. But for truth. And for the brother who might still be watching. Episode 6. The Man in the Ash Cloak. The palace gates closed behind them with a finality that echoed in Vale's chest. He rode beside Renard on a narrow forest path, the king dressed in a travel cloak of deep crimson, his crown left behind. Their guards had been dismissed. This journey was not one of conquest or ceremony, it was a search for truth. You don't have to come, Vale had told him that morning. I do, Renard had replied. Because if I lost my brother and my memory, and still chose you, then I need to know why. Now, the woods whispered around them, branches creaking, birds silent. The map Vale carried was old, marked with Elian's last known outpost, a ruined watchtower near the borderlands, long abandoned. They reached it by dusk. The tower stood like a broken tooth against the sky, its stones blackened by fire. Vale dismounted first, scanning the clearing. No signs of life, he murmured. Renard stepped beside him. Then why does it feel like we're being watched? A twig snapped. They turned. A figure stood at the edge of the trees, tall, cloaked in ash gray, hood drawn low. He didn't move. Didn't speak. Vale stepped forward. Who are you? Silence. Then, the figure tilted his head. You shouldn't be here, he said. His voice was low, roughened by smoke or time. Renard narrowed his eyes. Do you know this place? The man didn't answer. Vale's heart pounded. Do you know Prince Elian? The man's shoulders tensed. Elian is dead, he said. Let the past burn. Vale stepped closer. Then why do you wear his crest? The man froze. Renard drew his blade. Show your face. The man hesitated, then turned and vanished into the trees. Vale ran after him, but the forest swallowed him whole. Only a single feather remained silver, scorched at the tip. Vale picked it up, breath shallow. That was him, he whispered. I know it. Renard looked at the trees, jaw clenched. Then we're not chasing a ghost. We're chasing a man who doesn't want to be found. Vale closed his fingers around the feather. Then we'll find him anyway. Above them, the stars blinked into view. And somewhere in the dark, a brother watched from the shadows, torn between memory and exile. Episode 7. The Village That Forgot to Die. The road narrowed as they rode deeper into the valley. Mist clung to the trees like breath, and the air grew colder with each step. Vale's map marked the place as Duskwell, a village erased from royal records decades ago. But Elian's journal had mentioned it once, cryptic and brief. If the crown fails, find me where memory lingers longest. They arrived at dusk. Duskwell was quiet. Too quiet. The houses were intact, but the windows were shuttered, the doors closed. No smoke rose from chimneys. No children played in the streets. Renard dismounted first. It's like time stopped. Vale nodded. Or refused to move forward. They walked through the village square, past a fountain covered in moss and ivy. A single figure sat on the edge, an old woman in a cloak of faded violet, eyes sharp despite her age. You've come late, she said, without looking up. Vale stepped forward. We're looking for someone. Prince Elian of Solvar. The woman chuckled. Everyone who comes here is looking for someone. That's the curse. Renard frowned. What curse? She turned to him. This village remembers what others forget. Names. Faces. Regrets. We carry them like stones. Vale's voice was quiet. Did Elian come here? The woman studied him. He did. Years ago. He wore a cloak of ash and spoke like a man who'd seen too much. Renard stepped closer. Is he still here? The woman shook her head. He left. But not before leaving something behind. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small bundle, wrapped in cloth, sealed with wax. Vale took it carefully, breaking the seal. Inside was a letter. To the one who finds this, I could not stay. The village remembers too much, and I needed to forget. But if you've come this far, then you're ready. Follow the river north. There, beneath the cliffs, lies the truth I buried. Renard looked at Vale. He's leading us somewhere. Vale nodded. To the truth. To the cure. The woman stood. Be careful. The river doesn't just carry water. It carries memory. And not all of it is kind. They left Duskwell as the moon rose. Behind them, the village remained still. But Vale felt it, like eyes watching from behind every shutter. And somewhere ahead, Elian waited. Not as a prince, but as a man who had tried to forget. Episode 8. The Chamber Beneath the River. The cliffs rose like jagged teeth above the river. Vale stood at the edge, wind tugging at his cloak, eyes scanning the rocks below. The water roared, silver and wild, carving through stone like memory through time. Renard joined him, breath visible in the cold air. This is the place, Vale said. Elian's letter said beneath the cliffs. Renard frowned. There's nothing here. Vale knelt, brushing moss from the ground. Beneath it, a symbol half sun, half flame, etched into the stone. It's a seal, he whispered. Royal. Hidden. He pressed his palm to it. The ground trembled. A section of the cliff slid open, revealing a narrow passage carved into the rock. Cold air spilled out, tinged with ash and something older. Renard stared. He built this. Vale nodded. Or found it. Either way, he wanted it hidden. They entered together. The chamber was small, circular, lit by crystals embedded in the walls. At its center stood a pedestal, and on it, a second journal. Newer. Bound in serpent leather. Vale opened it. To Renard and Vale, if you've found this, then the crown has cracked. I try to protect you both. The Ember Relic was never meant to be touched. It was designed to burn away falsehood, but it burns indiscriminately. I sealed it with my blood. But someone broke the seal. I suspect it was Thorn. Renard's jaw clenched. Thorn. He set the trap. Vale kept reading. I left because I feared what I'd become. But I watched. I saw Renard choose love over legacy. I saw Vale stand in truth. You are stronger together than I ever was alone. At the bottom, a final line. The cure lies not in magic, but in memory shared. Tell him everything. Let him choose again. Vale closed the journal, eyes shimmering. Renard stepped closer. Then tell me. Vale looked up. You were cruel. Proud. But you changed. You saw me. Not the mask. Not the enemy. Just me. Renard's voice was quiet. And I loved you? Vale nodded. You did. Renard reached out, fingers brushing Vale's cheek. Then I choose you. Again. The chamber pulsed with light. Outside, the river roared. Inside, memory returned, not through spells, but through truth. And somewhere in the shadows, Elian smiled. Episode 9. The Crown Rewritten. The palace gates opened at dawn. Vale rode beside Renard, cloaked in ash and silver, the journal of Elian tucked safely beneath his belt. The guards bowed as they passed, but their eyes flickered with unease. Word of their journey had spread. So had whispers of Thorn's schemes. Inside, the throne room was already full. Thorn stood at the center, dressed in ceremonial black, flanked by nobles who had once doubted Vale's place. He smiled as Renard entered. Your Majesty, Thorn said smoothly. We feared you'd been misled. Renard stepped forward. I was. By you. Gasps rippled through the court. Vale didn't flinch. Renard held up Elian's journal. You broke the seal on the Ember Crown. You triggered the relic. You fractured my memory. Thorn's smile faltered. That's a bold accusation. Vale stepped beside Renard. It's not an accusation. It's truth. And this journal proves it. Thorn's eyes narrowed. You expect the court to believe a ghost's scribbles? Renard's voice was sharp. I expect them to believe me. He turned to the nobles. I remember now. I remember the war. The bond. The choice. I chose Vale not out of impulse, but out of clarity. Vale's heart pounded. Renard continued. Thorn manipulated the court. He endangered the crown. And he tried to erase the one person who stood beside me when I had nothing. Thorn stepped back. You're making a mistake. Renard's eyes burned. No. I'm correcting one. He turned to the council. Effective immediately, Lord Thorn is stripped of his title. His lands will be held in trust until further review. Thorn's face twisted. You'll regret this. Vale stepped forward. No. You will. Guards escorted Thorn from the chamber. Silence followed. Then, Renard turned to the court. From this day forward, the crown will not be ruled by fear. It will be guided by truth. And by those who choose love over legacy. He reached for Vale's hand. Together. Vale looked out at the nobles, some stunned, some smiling. He had returned not as a prisoner. Not as a pawn. But as a partner. And the court would never forget it. Episode 10. The Flame Returns. The palace garden was quiet at dawn. Vale stood beneath the silverleaf tree, the wind tugging gently at his cloak. Renard sat beside him on the stone bench, fingers laced with veils, eyes watching the horizon. He said he'd come, Renard murmured. Vale nodded. He will. The journal had ended with a promise. When the crown is ready to listen, I'll return. Now, the court had listened. Thorn was gone. The relic sealed. The truth spoken. And the crown finally was ready. A figure stepped through the garden gate. Tall. Cloaked in ash. Hood drawn low. Renard stood slowly. Elian. The figure pulled back his hood. Silver eyes. Burn-marked cheek. Familiar and changed. I'm sorry, Elian said. I should have come sooner. Renard crossed the garden in 3 strides and pulled him into a fierce embrace. Vale watched quietly, heartful. Elian stepped back, eyes flicking to Vale. You kept him steady. Vale smiled. He kept me steady too. They sat together beneath the tree, the morning light painting gold across the stone. The relic was never meant to be used, Elian said. It was a test. When I failed, Renard shook his head. You protected us. You gave us the chance to choose. Elian looked at them both. Then choose again. Not just each other, but the kingdom. What it becomes next. Vale's voice was quiet. No more secrets. No more masks. Renard nodded. No more crowns built on fear. Elian smiled. Then let's rebuild. Together. That afternoon, the court gathered. Renard stood before them, not in armor, not in robes, but in simple black and silver. Vale stood beside him. Elian behind them. This kingdom has been ruled by legacy, Renard said. By memory twisted into power. That ends today. Vale stepped forward. We will lead not as rulers, but as keepers. Of truth. Of magic. Of love. Elian raised his voice. And we will remember. Not just what was lost, but what was found. The nobles bowed. The people cheered. And the crown once cracked was rewritten. Not in gold, but in flame. And in the hands of three who chose each other. Again. And again. And again. Bonus epilogue, the Garden of Memory. The silverleaf tree had grown taller. Its branches stretched wide across the palace garden, casting dappled light over the stone bench beneath it. Flowers bloomed in soft spirals, crimson, ash gray, and serpent green. A trio of colors that no longer symbolized war, but unity. Vale sat with a book in his lap, fingers tracing the edges of a page he'd read 100 times. Renard leaned against his shoulder, eyes closed, the weight of the crown long since softened by time. Elian knelt nearby, tending to a patch of moonflowers that refused to bloom unless spoken to gently. They're stubborn, Elian muttered. Like someone I know. Vale smiled. They just need patience. Renard cracked one eye open. You say that like you weren't the most impatient man in the court. Vale turned the page. I was strategic. Not impatient. Elian chuckled. You were both impossible. They sat in silence for a while, the breeze rustling through the leaves. Do you ever think about the beginning? Renard asked softly. Vale nodded. Every time I see my reflection. Elian looked up. I think about the fire. The relic. The choices we made. Renard reached for Vale's hand. And the ones we didn't regret. Vale squeezed his fingers. We built something. Not just a kingdom, but a way forward. Elian stood, brushing soil from his hands. A crown that remembers. A court that listens. A love that didn't need magic to survive. Renard smiled. And a brother who finally came home. Elian sat beside them, the three of them framed by the tree's silver canopy. What now? Vale asked. Renard leaned back. Now we rest. We teach. We let others write their own stories. Elian added, and we remind them that memory isn't weakness. It's the root of everything. The sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the garden. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by blooms and laughter and the echoes of what once was, the three who had rewritten a kingdom sat together, not as rulers, but as family.